Operation Pied Piper was a government program in Britain before and during World War II to protect vulnerable civilians, especially children, from Nazi bombardment.
Children would be sent to a safe place, sent away from the bombing, sent away from London into the country.
Vivienne Ashby Montague was 4 when she and her 9-year-old sister Janet were evacuated from their suburban London home.
We went to the station, there were loads and loads of other kids, and we had a gas mask in a little cardboard box around our neck, and we had a name tag.
Being 4, Vivienne doesn't remember much about the trip.
My mother was at the station and said goodbye, so I was probably crying.
Some children were sent as far as Australia, Canada, or the US. Vivienne and Janet ended up more than 200 miles away in Cornwall. Janet remembered the school hall they all gathered, and a man with a clipboard. Brothers and sisters were separated.
And he said, well, I have 2 boys. Who wants to take those 2 boys? And somebody would raise their hand, well, I'll take one of them. I'm not taking 2.
Vivienne and Janet stayed together, but Vivienne says the first family that took them in was awful. Janet remembered the first thing the woman showed her was a bucket.
And she said, you're going to wash yours and your sister's clothes in that bucket with cold water all the time you're here.
That family lived in a house high above the ocean. Now picture this. These little girls had to climb slippery rocks that were continuously being sprayed by breakers from ocean waves to collect mollusks to feed the family's chickens.
We were on those wet rocks. Imagine a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old with spray coming up to just feed their chickens. And somebody told me the other day, Vivienne, no wonder you're allergic to eggs. You hate chickens.
Vivienne is still afraid of water.
The grace of God kept us alive.
The daughter, Vivienne says, was a bully.
And she thought it was great fun to pick me up by my neck and swing me around.
The girls were glad to leave that place and found their next family to be very welcoming. Mr. and Mrs. Stick were kind.
And they had a farm, and they were just lovely. They didn't have any children, but they were lovely.
From there, they went to live with the Barretts. The Barretts lived on Bodmin Moor.
It's in a lot of scary English novels. I think Edgar Allan Poe probably wrote about Bodmin Moor.
But Vivienne says the Barretts weren't scary at all. They were nice.
He did carving too, because I remember a carved wooden parrot.
It's in the letters Janet exchanged to her mother back home.
Dear Mummy, I hope you are well. Mr. Barrett is making parrots. He's also making clowns. She goes, P.S. I will tell Vivienne to answer your postcard, which was very nice. She says she would like an ice cream. I think everyone would.
Vivienne would write her own letters of day-to-day happenings of a little girl far from home. 2 years later, in 1944, the girls were finally allowed to come back to Stoneleigh, their town near London.
In with my mother and back to my lovely bedroom and my cat.
But war had changed and scarred their hometown. Vivienne remembers playing in the rubble of bombed-out houses.
I don't think I realized they were bombed houses. We called them the brickfields. So that was where we would go and play.
Vivienne says nobody talked about their time away. Janet only spoke of it a couple times, but Vivienne says her mother, years later, would tell her, you can't trust the government.
And felt probably that she might have been tricked into sending us away. I never felt that. I just felt that she had no choice.
She says her dad wasn't in the picture much, and her mother had to work to keep the family home and couldn't go with her girls.
If she would have left, she wouldn't have had any money. And Janet and I were away for 2 years. So there's no way she could possibly have not worked for 2 years.
Some kids thought Pied Piper an adventure. It may have protected many children, but it had a dark side too.
In theory, it makes sense. But in reality, it probably was very traumatic.
When we come back, 80 years later, shadows from the past and a new life in America.
Yes. So it's just lovely. Yes.
For Vivienne, life after Operation Pied Piper went on.
That's me in my school uniform of Rosebery Grammar School for Girls.
When she grew up, she worked in a bank and as a nanny. She worked in an advertising agency. It was an exciting time and place.
I went to London and went to jazz clubs. I liked jazz. So I remember going into the basement jazz club and dancing. Loved it.
But in 1965, she left London behind, moving with her family to New Jersey. Janet was already there. Janet has passed away. Today, Vivienne lives in Kalispell near her kids and grandchildren. She likes to travel, but feels homesick when gone too long.
It's an inherent homesickness and a separation anxiety that I have.
She doesn't remember being homesick in Cornwall.
But I must have been, yes. My sister said that I cried all the time.
She shows us a painting of her family's old air raid shelter in England. After the war, it became a kind of playhouse for young Vivienne.
And I called it Rose Cottage. And I had a little cafe in Rose Cottage. And I made little menu cards.
In Kalispell, Rose Cottage became Vivienne's 5th Street Cafe.
Doing tea parties and breakfast and lunch. Loved it, loved it. And I've been retired 10 years.
Today, it's the Need Cafe, owned by her daughter and son-in-law. This is her cookbook, Food, Life, and Afternoon Tea. Vivienne loves to feed people. She says so many years later, she's talking more about her unusual childhood.
And I'm talking about it now, in my 80s, more than I ever have in my whole life.
She says the war in Ukraine may have brought those thoughts to the surface.
That was what London looked like. When you see those bombed apartments and bombed houses and those people with no homes cuddling their dogs and cats, that was what London was like, and many other cities.
She can hardly watch those children of the Ukraine being evacuated. She knows how they must feel.
And I'm just so outraged that here we are in the 21st century, 80 years later, and we're still doing the same darn thing.
Vivienne is reaching out to share her experiences as a child in war-torn England and has found an excellent audience in school kids and others who've never heard of Operation Pied Piper. She thinks of Operation Pied Piper as a strange title to help kids, the Pied Piper of that fairy tale leading children away from their parents. It's pretty grim.
Yeah, so let's keep them safe. Well, we need a name for this. What should we call it? Operation Children's Safety? No, that's...
That's too boring.
Yes, it's just insane, absolutely insane.
The Pied Piper is in many ways still there, and yet far away too.
When I talk about it, I can feel some emotion, but I almost see that as another 4-year-old.
She says it's made her dig deeper into everything.
I don't take things at surface value. I think that was, it really made me stronger, probably.
Tougher, she says. More resilient. Kevin Mackey, NBC, Montana.